Gentleman from Oregon is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his amendment.
I thank the chairman. Over the past 2 months, our subcommittee on telecommunications has worked to craft a bill that would achieve 2 goals that are central to this full committee's mission: relieving regulatory burdens for small businesses and protecting consumers. So the Small Business Broadband Deployment Act would extend the Federal Communications Commission's existing exemption for small businesses from the enhanced transparency reporting requirements of the 2015 Open Internet Order, as well as increase the threshold for defining what a small business is. At our January legislative hearing on this subject, we heard from a small Internet service provider who shared the dilemma that many small ISPs face in these circumstances. Should they put up new equipment, or should they hire a lawyer to help with compliance? Should they improve service for customers, or should they devote their financial resources to sifting through regulatory language and drafting extensive reports on packet loss? Our discussion draft would seek to alleviate the unnecessary burden associated with these requirements. The ISPs are still subject. They are still subject to the 2010 transparency rules, and customers are still provided with all the information about their service they have come to expect. By extending the existing exemption, however, we're giving certainty to small businesses seeking to make budgetary and operational decisions in a long-term fashion. We've also increased the threshold for the definition of small business, bringing in closer in line with some of the Commission's previous definitions that were blessed by the Small Business Administration. Especially want to thank Congressman Loebsack and his staff, as well as the Minority Committee staff, for their work on this bill, and especially on this amendment. These negotiations have produced what I think is a strong bill that helps protect these vital small providers who serve constituents like those in my district in eastern Oregon or in Mr. Loebsack's district in Iowa, who might otherwise not have the robust Internet service that small ISPs provide. And so, Mr. Chairman, I think the amendment we have before us today reached the compromise we always hoped to reach. It would sunset this provision after 5 years. It requires the FCC, after 6 months, to submit a report to our committee and other relevant committees regarding the exemption, whether it should be made permanent, and whether our definition of small business makes sense. And further, we said that not more than this would apply to ISPs that have 250,000 subscribers. That seemed to be a better number than the 100,000 the FCC picked. And so I was glad we were able to reach a conclusion in a fair and balanced way on this bill. I thank Mr. Loebsack especially for his work on this. And I would yield what time I have remaining to the gentleman from Iowa if he'd like to comment on that.
Thank you, Mr. Walden, and thank you for working on this. I want to thank you and your staff and subcommittee ranking member Ms. Eshoo and her staff for working so well with me and my staff. The staff really did a lot of work on this, as is always the case. It's a common sense agreement, and I think this is a tremendous example of how we can work across the aisle, which is what I think folks in our districts really want us to do, to make sure that we can get things done and do something that makes sense for our constituents, and I do thank you. As I said when I offered my amendment in subcommittee, my goal throughout this process has been to strike a careful balance between the important consumer protections in the FCC's transparency rule and the costs for smaller Internet service providers. And I think what we have achieved with this amendment is, in fact, that goal. For me, the legislation is really about rural broadband development. I've often mentioned that I have well over 100 separate Internet service providers in Iowa. And this amendment will allow those providers, along with small providers throughout the country, to focus their limited resources on deploying more broadband, which rural America desperately needs, and offering new and improved services while giving them the time they need to comply with the FCC's additional requirements. Again, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate all of your great support on this, and the ranking member as well, and I'm really happy that we did come to this agreement today, and hopefully everyone's going to vote for this, and thank you, and I yield back. Thank you.
And with that, Mr. Chairman, I ask our members to support the amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Other members, Chair would recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Eshoo, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the last word. I'm very pleased that that we've reached a compromise on H.R. 4596. I think all the good reasons have been stated by both Chairman Walden and Representative Loebsack. We did an informal survey. This is for members that aren't part of this subcommittee and I think you find it interesting. An informal survey of associations representing small broadband providers, and they suggested that an exemption of the FCC's enhanced transparency rules for companies with 250,000 or fewer subscribers would adequately address the vast majority of their membership. So this has been realigned from the original proposals, and I think that it makes sense. This is obviously a bipartisan amendment, and it reflects this data by protecting the nation's smallest ISPs, but it also continues to ensure that the majority of consumers receive the full set of benefits promised by the enhanced transparency rules, including clear disclosure of promotional rates, fees, surcharges, and data caps. And this is very important to preserve these benefits for consumers. They are battles that were waged and heavily sought. So I think additionally, by including a 5-year sunset, the amendment gives the FCC further time to study whether or not the exemption should be made permanent and how a small ISP should be defined. So I think that very importantly that broadband providers of all sizes will continue to be responsible for following the FCC's bright line, and it is a bright line, against blocking, throttling, and paid prioritization, as well as the transparency rules that were adopted in 2010. So for these reasons, I support the amendment. I thank Chairman Walden and Congressman Loebsack for the work that they did, and to not only my staff, but certainly the committee staff on both sides of the aisle. And with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Other members wishing to speak on the amendment? Seeing none, Chair will call the question on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Oregon. Bipartisan amendment. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Are there further amendments to the bill? Seeing none, the vote occurs on H.R. 4596 as amended. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The bill is agreed to.